before Mali became one of the richest empires the world had ever seen. Before its gold flowed into the markets of Cairo and Venice, there was a boy who could not walk. He was born into a royal family, yet no one expected him to rule anything. He crawled where other children ran. He was mocked in the court that was supposed to one day belong to him. And before his story was finished, his own people would be forced to flee their homeland with him as a child in exile. This is the story of how that boy became the man who built one of the greatest empires in African history, and why, according to Mandinka oral tradition, the empire almost never came to exist at all. In the 13th century, in the heart of West Africa, along the upper reaches of the Niger River, a cluster of small Mande kingdoms competed for land, trade, and power. One of these was Niani, ruled by a king named Megan Konfata. According to Mandinka oral tradition, preserved for centuries by griots, the hereditary storytellers and historians of the Mande world, the king took a second wife named Sogolan. She was said to be unlike anyone in the court. Strong-willed, unconventional, and in the language of the epic, marked for a destiny greater than her circumstances suggested. Their son was Sunjata. According to the traditional epic, Sunjata's early childhood was defined by a physical struggle. He could not walk. In a court where a king's son was expected to embody strength, this was seen by many as shameful, and Sunjata and his mother reportedly endured ridicule because of it. We want to be careful here, because this part of the story has sometimes been sensationalized. What the oral tradition emphasizes is not the disability itself, but the transformation that followed. In the epic, Sunjata eventually rises, quite literally standing for the first time, in a moment that griots have told for generations as proof that destiny cannot be judged by early appearances. Whether this happened exactly as the epic describes, we cannot say with certainty, but the story endures because it captures something almost every culture recognizes: the person underestimated by everyone around them, who becomes the one they depend on. That moment, though, was only the beginning of Sunjata's trials. What came next would take him away from everything he knew. With Magan Konfata's death, the political balance in Niani shifted. Oral tradition describes rivalry within the royal household, competition over succession, and threats against Sogolan and her children. According to the epic, Sogolan made the decision to leave Niani, taking Sunjata and his siblings into exile, moving between neighboring Mande territories for safety and in some versions for alliance building. We should be honest about the historical uncertainty here. The exact route, the exact courts they stayed in, and the exact length of the exile vary between different griot traditions. What most versions agree on is the outcome. Sunjata did not grow up in the palace that was meant to be his. He grew up displaced, watching, learning, and waiting. It's tempting to think of exile only as loss. But in nearly every version of this story, it's during these years away from home that Sunjata is said to have built the relationships, the reputation, and the resolve that would define the rest of his life. Because while Sunjata was in exile, a new threat was rising back in the Mande homeland, one that would soon make his return not just possible, but necessary. That threat had a name: Sumanguru Kante, the ruler of the neighboring Soso kingdom. According to both oral tradition and the broader historical record of the period, Sumanguru expanded his power aggressively across the Mande region in the early 13th century, subjugating smaller kingdoms, including, eventually, Niani itself. Traditional accounts describe Sumanguru as a powerful and feared ruler, associated in the epic with ironworking and formidable, almost supernatural, ability. As Sumanguru's grip tightened, word reportedly reached the exiled prince: his homeland needed him. According to the epic, representatives of the Mande peoples sought Sunjata out and asked him to return and lead a coalition against Soso rule. The boy who once could not walk was now being asked to lead an army. What followed is remembered as one of the defining moments in West African history: the Battle of Kirina, fought around 1235. According to tradition, Sunjata assembled a coalition of Mande chiefdoms, former rivals now united against a common threat, and led them against Sumanguru's forces near the town of Kirina, along the Niger River. We don't have precise historical records of troop numbers or battlefield tactics, and much of what's described in the oral epic, including dramatic personal duels and symbolic contests between Sunjata and Sumanguru, should be understood as epic storytelling rather than verified military history. What historians broadly accept is that this battle marked the decisive defeat of Soso power and the rise of a new political order under Sunjata's leadership. For the Mande peoples watching their homeland reshaped, Kirina wasn't just a battle. It was the end of one era of domination and the beginning of another that would outlast every kingdom that came before it. In the aftermath of Kirina, Sunjata did something that set him apart from most conquerors of his era. He didn't just defeat his rivals, he built a system to hold them together. The territories once fragmented into competing Mande chiefdoms began to consolidate into a single political structure, centered on the Niger River's fertile floodplain, a region perfectly positioned for agriculture and trade. This was the foundation of what would become the Mali Empire. Under this emerging system, gold and trade networks that had existed for generations were brought under more unified control. Farming communities along the Niger fed a growing population, and the political infrastructure Sunjata is credited with establishing gave Mali something many empires never achieve: the ability to survive its founder. Because winning the battle was, in many ways, the easier part. What Sunjata built next may be the reason his name is still remembered 8 centuries later. Mande oral tradition also credits this period with a set of governing principles, sometimes called the Kurukan Fuga, associated with a gathering of Mande leaders, establishing rules for how the newly unified territories would coexist. We need to be careful with this one. In recent years, some popular accounts have described the Kurukan Fuga as an ancient written constitution, sometimes comparing it directly to modern legal documents. Historians caution against this framing. The Kurukan Fuga tradition was preserved and transmitted orally for centuries, and the specific wording popularly cited today comes from much later documentation and interpretation. Its precise historical origins and how closely later versions match anything actually established in the 1200s remain genuinely debated among scholars. What the tradition does reliably reflect is something real about the values of the society. Sunjata is credited with founding an emphasis on alliance building, defined social responsibilities, and mechanisms for resolving conflict between the peoples now sharing one political system. The political and economic foundation established in Sunjata's era gave Mali the structure to grow far beyond its founding generation. Over the following century, Mali expanded into one of the largest and wealthiest empires in the medieval world, controlling trans-Saharan trade routes and gold sources that would eventually make it famous across North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. It's worth being precise here. The ruler most people associate with Mali's legendary wealth, Mansa Musa, famous for his extraordinary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, was not Sunjata. Mansa Musa ruled nearly a century later as one of Sunjata's successors. But the empire Mansa Musa inherited, the trade networks he controlled, and the political stability that let him leave his capital for over a year without the empire collapsing, all of it traced back to the foundation laid in Sunjata's generation. Sometimes the most consequential ruler isn't the one who becomes famous, it's the one who makes the fame possible. Today, Sunjata Keita occupies a unique place in African history. He exists at the intersection of documented history and living oral tradition, a figure real enough to be studied by historians, and mythic enough to still be performed by griots across West Africa. The Epic of Sundiata remains one of the most important works of African oral literature, still recited, still taught, still reshaped by each generation of storytellers who carry it forward. And the empire he's credited with founding became a byword for wealth and power that echoed far beyond Africa's borders. A legacy that started, according to tradition, with a boy no one expected to rule anything at all. History remembers the kings who inherited great empires. But sometimes, the most important ruler is the one who built the foundation everyone else stood on.